for the defense. May I proceed?
Go ahead.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Untrained, unauthorized, unqualified. That was the position that the undercover detective who investigated this case found herself in. That undercover detective is Officer Mickey Keenan. But to start from the beginning, when Ms. Bancroft submitted her proposal to the Midlands Gambling Commission, she submitted her proposal in hopes that the Gambling Commission would deem her proposal worthy to issue her a new casino license in Midlands. But at the time Ms. Bancroft submitted her proposal, she was unaware of the future that lay ahead for her, a future that Officer Keenan would create for her. When Officer Keenan began her undercover work in the Midlands Gambling Commission, she began with the expectations of finding corruption. But after 2 years on that case, Officer Keenan found no evidence at all of corruption in the Gambling Commission at all. That's when Officer Keenan decided that it was time that she take this investigation in the way she favored it to go. And her opportunity came on October 1st of 2014 when the Midlands Gambling Commission announced that they were ready to issue a new casino license in Midlands. When Ms. Bancroft decided to display interest in that casino license by calling the office of Chase Covington and saying, "I would like to discuss my proposal," to grease the wheels, get things started, Officer Keenan, she latched onto those statements and created a crime, created a suspect, and created a victim. Now, following that phone call, Officer Keenan reached out to Ms. Bancroft's assistant, Corey Hyde, and she coerced Corey Hyde through the use of trying to accuse her with false allegations to help her in her investigation. Now, Corey Hyde set up meetings for Officer Keenan, and it was at those meetings that Officer Keenan was able to pressure Ms. Bancroft into bribing the chair of the Gambling Commission. It was at those meetings that Officer Keenan made her point very clear, that without bribing the chair of the Gambling Commission, the deal for Ms. Bancroft's new casino proposal would simply not get done. Members of the jury, without the presence of Officer Keenan, my client, Ms. Avery Bancroft, would never have had to bribe the chair of the Gambling Commission. Now, to move on to the burden in today's case, we as the defense have raised an affirmative defense. We must prove that my client Avery Bancroft was entrapped to make this bribe by a preponderance of the evidence. By a preponderance of the evidence, I simply mean that we must prove that it is more likely than not that she was entrapped to make this bribe. But we are not the only ones with a burden in today's case. The prosecution, they bear a burden of proof as well. They must prove that the defendant, Avery Bancroft, was predisposed to commit this bribe, and they must prove their burden beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, members of the jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, that is the highest burden in our legal system. This is the hardest, most challenging burden to prove. Our burden of preponderance of the evidence, that is much lower than the prosecution's. We only have to prove that it's more likely than not. The prosecution, they have to leave no doubt in your minds at all that Avery Bancroft was predisposed to commit this crime. Now, members of the jury, the prosecution has not met their burden today, and we as the defense have met our burden today. But let's start with talking about how the prosecution has not met their burden today. Who has the prosecution called before us today? Well, first, they called the step-sibling of Chase Covington, Tracy Menetos. What did she come before us and tell us? She came before us and told us that she loved fashion. That's not relevant to today's case. She came before us and she told us that she heard Avery Bancroft say she was willing to go the extra mile. Members of the jury, Ms. Menetos came before us, and all she did is she took Avery Bancroft's statements, took them out of context, and tried to prosecute Avery Bancroft. Let's move on to the undercover detective, Mickey Keenan. What did Mickey Keenan come before us and tell you? Well, Mickey Keenan came before us, and she told you about her side of the story. But Mickey Keenan failed to neglect the defendant's side of the story. Now let's take a look at the transcript of the March 31st conversation. It was in this conversation that Officer Keenan continually insisted that Avery Bancroft bribe Chase Covington for her vote. Officer Keenan says, "Why should we let you have 2 casino licenses?" Avery Bancroft responds, "Because I'm the best." Officer Keenan continues to say, "Let's try this again. What are you willing to do to make this happen?" Ms. Bancroft continues to talk about her casino proposal. Officer Keenan says again, "You know that's not what I meant. You have to go the extra mile." Officer Keenan continued and continued to insist again and again that Ms. Bancroft bribed the chair of the Midlands Gambling Commission for her vote. Let's take a look at April 13th, when Ms. Bancroft shows further reluctance. Officer Keenan passes Ms. Bancroft a napkin and a pen to write down a bribe. What does Ms. Bancroft do with it? She wipes her face and sets the napkin down. Later in that conversation, Officer Keenan then again hands her a second napkin and a pen, but this time says it is always about the money. Members of the jury, I might not explicitly say bribe, but it is implied through those statements. Now let's take a look at the third and final witness the prosecution has called. The third and final witness that the prosecution has called can show us no interactions that Avery Bancroft had with Mickey Keenan. That witness cannot show you anything that has anything to do with predisposition. Members of the jury, the prosecution has not met their burden. But unlike the prosecution, we as the defense have met our burden today. We have showed you that Avery Bancroft was not predisposed to commit this bribe, and that Mickey Keenan did entrap Avery Bancroft to commit this bribe. Mickey Keenan, March 31st, insisting that she bribe Mr. Covington. April 13th, insisting that she bribe Mr. Covington. Look back to March 2nd, before Officer Keenan ever even met Avery Bancroft. She said the plan was to catch Avery Bancroft bribing the chair of the Gambling Commission. Members of the jury, Officer Keenan was the one who was personally invested in the stake of the outcome of this case. Now the prosecution, they just came before you and they talked about authorization for this investigation. They told you that this case was authorized by the chief of police. But members of the jury, where did this evidence come out in trial? This evidence never came out. The prosecution came before you and they talked for 6 minutes about evidence that wasn't in trial. They spoke upon how Corey Hyde was a frat person. They talked about rappers, singers, R&B stars. Where is the evidence? Where is the evidence supporting their claim that Avery Bancroft committed this bribe out of her own free will? Members of the jury, the prosecution has failed to meet their burden in today's case, and the defense has met our burden. And that is why we ask that you find my client, Avery Bancroft, not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Is there a rebuttal to the state?
There is, Your Honor. Opposing counsel has come up here and said that we've offered no evidence. They have twisted the words of Mickey Keenan almost beyond comprehension. They have ignored the own words of their defendant because they don't want you to look at them. They don't want you to see that they're willing to get their hands dirty. They know how to play the game. In fact, they brought up the March 31st transcript. I think I should too. It's true, yes. Mickey Keenan asked, "What more do you have? What more can you offer?" Never said he had me money, or a bribe, or anything of the sort. What did Bancroft say? "I may not be one of those Jersey boys or girls, but I know how to play the game." Ladies and gentlemen, what game was Mickey Keenan playing? She was never talking about that. No, it was the defendant that took it there. It was the defendant who went to that reach and decided on their own volition, with the help of Covington, to commit a bribe in order to secure their own greedy ambitions. Now, they told you about a napkin. Yeah, it's true. Mickey Keenan handed a napkin over to Bancroft and repeated her own words. It's all about the money. Let me restate them, ladies and gentlemen. Repeated the defendant's words. It's all about the money. Now, she didn't say anything else. In fact, she didn't give her any instruction. She didn't give her any sort of implication, verbal or otherwise, to write down what you see before you. And that is the amount of the bribe. Mickey Keenan never said to write that down. Mickey Keenan didn't offer it. Mickey Keenan did not cross it off and then, once that was rejected, slide a new number back. Mickey Keenan, in fact, was never present at the meeting where the bribe took place, and in fact didn't even know where the defendant and Chase Covington were during that meeting. She thought she had failed. She was never trying to create a criminal. She was trying to expose them. That's what she does. She isn't trying to do anything but her job, and that is to help the people of the Midlands ensure that justice is done. You must find
Time.
Bancroft guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Would the judges like us to step out while you conclude your ballots? Yeah, just a couple minutes and then we'll be ready to submit the ballots.